players calling their own shots and predicting their stats. It's something that you see from time to time. A great example of this was Devin Bush this past season for the Steelers, where he made some scarily accurate predictions. But this was intentional. Sometimes, you predict your own stats on the dot without even recognizing it. Sometimes, you doubt yourself and throw out some numbers that you know you can't possibly hit, and sure enough, you hit them. And Terry Bradshaw did just that. This is the story of the time that the legendary Steelers quarterback, without realizing it, predicted his own stats. We need some context beforehand. It's training camp of the 1977 season, and there are some doubts about Bradshaw. Yes, by this point he's won 2 Super Bowls, and nobody's saying he's a bad quarterback by any means. But it seemed as though Pittsburgh wasn't winning because of him. In 1976, Bradshaw started 8 games, completing just 47.9% of his passes, throwing 10 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Those numbers aren't great. In every major passing stat, including passer rating, touchdowns, and yards, he was outside the top 10. At this point in his career, Bradshaw had played 7 seasons. The first overall pick, had 0 first-team or second-team All-Pro selections, and had just 1 Pro Bowl appearance. Again, nobody was saying he was bad, but he wasn't exactly a top-tier quarterback at this point. Pittsburgh wasn't winning these games because of their quarterback play. They had the famed Steel Curtain defense that in 1976 allowed a mere 9.9 points per game. I want to put into perspective just how good Pittsburgh's defense was that year. In their final 9 regular season games, the Steelers allowed a touchdown in 1 of them. That's it. They shut out 5 of their opponents and allowed a field goal or 2 in the other 3. Mike Kruczek started 6 games at quarterback for the Steelers that season. He threw 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Pittsburgh went 6-0 during those games. So entering the 1977 season, questions were being asked about just how good Bradshaw was. And that's when he said his prophecy without realizing it. He said, "Everybody is waiting for me to erupt. Everybody is waiting for me to get 3,000 yards and 28 touchdowns like Kenny Stabler. But that's not going to happen. I don't think it can happen and us win." Later, he added, "I'm not the nucleus of this team. The defense and the running game are. It took me a while to get used to the idea, but now I like it." Little did Bradshaw know that everything he said in his comment was scarily wrong. Keep in mind that at the time of this comment, the most yards he ever threw in a season was 2,259, and the most touchdowns he ever threw in a season was 18. Bradshaw said he'd never throw 28 touchdowns in a season. The following year, in 1978, he threw 28. Bradshaw said he'd never throw for 3,000 yards. The following year, in 1978, he threw for 2,915. And Bradshaw said he'd never win putting up those numbers. The following year, in 1978, the Steelers won Super Bowl 13. Without knowing it, he predicted his touchdown total on the dot. He predicted the Super Bowl outcome on the dot. And he predicted his yardage total within 100. While he was off on the yardage total by 85, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing, when you do a bit of stat manipulation, he was actually pretty dead on. Players not named Terry Bradshaw attempted 12 passes that season for the Steelers. Bradshaw averaged 7.9 yards per pass attempt. If you add those 12 pass attempts onto Bradshaw's total and multiply that by 7.9, you get 3,002, which is pretty much right on the dot. So why did Bradshaw put up those numbers without realizing it, even though the Steelers didn't add anyone of note on offense that year? Well, to an extent, Bradshaw was right. He said his numbers weren't going to happen, and he was probably right under the old rule set. You see, after 1977, the NFL decided to change up the rules on offense, getting out of the dead ball era. In 1977, teams were averaging just 17.2 points per game, which was the lowest total since 1942 when World War II was happening. And for the first time since 1942, teams were averaging less than 1 receiving touchdown per game. The passer rating was the lowest it had been since 1956. So the NFL decided it was time for a change, and they made some rule changes to liven up the offense. Most notably, defenders were only allowed to make contact with receivers within 5 yards, instead of anywhere on the field. Bradshaw got better, but the rules definitely opened things up for the offense. But nevertheless, this might be one of the greatest predictions by a player of all time. Bradshaw, without knowing it, correctly predicted his entire 1978 stat line. Maybe he can't spell cat if you give him the C and the A, but he can make some great predictions unintentionally. Special thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.